Good morning, my friends. It is 10 o'clock in the morning in Oregon, and I'm just getting ready to read some more from the book, but I'm waiting to make sure all of you are here. Uh, if some of you are here, give me a like or a something. Oh, I see one set of eyes. Good morning, whoever that is. Say good morning. How great. Good morning, Kathy Nyman. Glad you're all here. And Wendy Murphy, good. It always helps me first to know that this is actually working. So good morning. I hope you're all doing well. I was blown away by the number of people who apparently tuned in yesterday. I think we've been up to almost 4,000 people who viewed these. So I'm so glad. It really makes me happy to be able to help. So today's kind of a special day for me. It is the annual celebration of my 39th birthday, as we call it around here. I made myself a cake. I'm going to be having that. It's a little lopsided. I wish my friend Mark Lipinski were here because he's really good at cake decorating. Oh, Barb Clark, I love you too, honey. Thanks. And all of you here. You always have so many comments, but I can't read and respond to them. I'm going to get right to the reading because I know that's what you're here for. But I do want to mention a couple of things, resources, other things that might help you if you're stuck at home. My husband and I just found that BroadwayHD.com is offering a 7-day free trial of their service. If you don't want it after that, you need to cancel, I think. But it's got access to all kinds of musicals and Broadway plays you can watch online. So that's kind of a fun thing. We've been enjoying that. You might want to check it out. And I also do want to mention that on my Fiercely Marie blog, which is at mariebostwick.com, I've got lots of things that I hope will help you at this time, including my favorite right now. I've got a recipe for easy baked rice pudding that's really good. So you might want to check those out. And I think we're just going to get right to it. Yesterday, if you're coming in late, yesterday's post, you can just look down on my in the feed. And as I said later, I hope we're going to get these on YouTube, but we haven't figured that out yet. We will. But look down and you can find the prologue in chapter 1 yesterday. But today we're going to be reading chapters 2 and 3. So let's get to it, shall we? I always hate it when people just go on and on too long. Chapter 2, Evelyn Dixon. Standing in the middle of downtown that day and turning in a slow circle, I decided that New Bern, Connecticut looked exactly as a New England village should. I still think so. The tallest building in town is the Congregational Church. It stands at the narrow western end of the green, an imposing facade that dominates the landscape as if anchoring the town to the Almighty, reminding the residents of the meaning of the word omnipresent. With its evenly spaced doors and windows aligned beneath the exact center of a white wooden belfry, it is a monument to symmetry. Next to it, painted in the same simple white clapboard as the church, stands a line of antique homes, probably from the late 1800s, on smallish lots. They are nearly identical, two-storied and rectangular in shape, with wide porches and high-pitched roofs, and, at least in comparison to the grand mansions that line the village's main east-west residential street, Elm, rather modest. The lots on Elm are large, some measured in acres instead of feet, and the homes sitting on them represent a variety of architectural styles: colonials, federals, Greek revivals, and Victorians. Historic plaques on the homes list dates of construction stretching from pre-revolutionary times to post-Civil War, the most recent having been built in 1902. Walking down the sidewalk on an autumn afternoon, under canopy of red gold maple leaves shot through with shafting sunbeams, you half expect a man in a tall beaver hat and morning coat, or a woman wearing hoop skirts and pulling on hand-tatted lace gloves to open the gate in one of the white picket fences and wish you good day. New Bern is a town with an active and powerful historic preservation society, and it shows. There is little distance or demarcation here between residential and commercial. People who live in town are within easy walking distance of New Bern's businesses, a small but diverse collection of restaurants, galleries, antique shops, and boutiques housed in two-story brick storefronts with hand-painted signs. There isn't an inch of neon in New Bern's main commercial street, aptly called Commerce. And even though the village shops clearly cater to the tourist trade, you'd be hard-pressed to buy a quart of milk or a packet of shoelaces in the village. All those mundane but necessary transactions take place in charmless cinder block buildings along the state route leading out of town. There is a feeling of authenticity to the place. Taking a quick walk around, perusing the village before deciding how to spend the rest of my day, I was pleased to see there's nothing too precious or souvenir-like for sale in the store windows. No t-shirts claiming that the wearer's girlfriend, husband, or grandma went to New Bern and all they got was a lousy t-shirt. And none of the merchants had dubbed their boutiques a shopee. I was looking forward to poking through the stores, but my rumbling stomach insisted that lunch come first. There were 3 or 4 nice restaurants to choose from, and all of them looked nice. But I settled on a place called Grill on the Green. Though it was still early, the restaurant was packed, and I had to wait a few minutes to be seated. Waiting for my table, I noticed that many of the customers were obviously tourists. The shopping bags and cameras gave them away. The handsome, gray-haired gentleman who was seating diners greeted many by first names, kissing the ladies on the cheeks and exchanging hearty handshakes and laughter with the men. Clearly, the restaurant was a favor of locals as well as visitors. It was easy to see why. The atmosphere was elegant but relaxed, with brick red wainscoting running beneath the walls painted a warm yellow, and the simple black Windsor chairs looked cozy around white-clothed tables. And the food? To die for. The chicken and endive salad I ordered was one of the best things I have ever eaten. Normally, I hate eating alone. It always makes me feel so conspicuous. But with the French patio doors open to the front of the restaurant to catch a warm fall breeze, a pleasant buzz of conversation in the background, and a great glass of Pinot Grigio to sip, I found myself smiling for the first time in a long time. The waitress brought me a cappuccino to finish my meal. So, are you up from New York for the day? Texas, actually. I took a room at the inn for a few days. I've always wanted to see the fall colors. Texas, she commented, looking at me with interest before placing a cup on the table. That's a long way. Well, you picked a perfect time for it. The weather's beautiful. We'll be packed this weekend, that's for sure. I noticed, do you always have so many tourists? She shook her head and put a ceramic container filled with pink, blue, and white sugar packets down near my cup. We've always got a steady stream of weekenders from New York, but we're too far from the city to be a big tourist attraction, not like the Hamptons or anything, which is fine with me, she grinned. I went to East Hampton for the weekend once. Couldn't wait to get home. Too many people. Here, we're busy in the summer, and of course, we get a lot of visitors now during leaf season, but that's only lasts a few weeks. Most businesses make 70% of their income in about 3 months' time. Things get pretty quiet after that. Doesn't that make it hard to make a living, I asked? The waitress shrugged. In a way, I guess. If we run into a summer with bad weather and the tourists stay home, it can be tough. But I've lived here all my life and always managed. I'd probably make more money if I lived somewhere else, but New Bern is a good place to raise my kids. Can't see that making more money would make me any happier, so I guess I'm here to stay. We'd been talking for quite a while. Standing near the bar, the maitre d' shot the waitress a look that reminded her that she had other tables. Is there anything else I can get for you? She asked quickly. No, thank you, just a check. She pulled the already prepared bill out of her black apron pocket and placed it on the table. It was nice talking to you, she said. I hope you enjoy your trip. If you get a chance, drive over to the nature preserve and walk the trails. They're real pretty this time of year. Thanks, I'll do that. I'd planned to do some window shopping after lunch, but changed my mind when a motor coach pulled up and disgorged a swarm of camera-wielding senior citizens onto the sidewalk. Instead, I crossed the street and took a walk on the green, hoping the crowd of seniors would disperse by the time I returned. The green, I soon learned, is just a quaint word for a municipal park that marks the center of the town and is a fixture in most New England villages. In New Bern, the green is a block wide and 3 blocks long. Commerce and Elm run along its long east-west edges. Maple and Church Streets bound the shorter sides. Those 4 are the most important thoroughfares in town, though I would later learn that Proctor Street, which parallels the backside of Elm, is where the real mansions are. Those homes, owned by old Yankees with old money, with layers of trees and hedges to camouflage them from prying eyes, don't look like much from the road. But once you get past the overgrown shrubbery, you'll discover grounds dotted with tennis courts, swimming pools, and carriage houses surrounding stately, enormous homes that rarely change hands. The owners' last names match those of the oldest headstones in the cemetery. In this part of the world, amassing a great fortune is considered admirable. Flaunting it is not. I took my time strolling through the green, gazing up at the tapestry of brilliant colored leaves. Some towering overhead like massive columns had obviously been there for decades, if not centuries. Others, more recently planted, with slender, pliable trunks, were scattered haphazardly on a carpet of grass. Hardy yellow and orange mums mounded in indiscriminately placed flower beds near bushes of purplish hydrangeas at their peak and leggy geraniums that were far past it. But for the sidewalks cutting through the park at tidy right angles until they met at the granite memorial to the Civil War dead, the green would have given the impression of nature run amok. Instead, the feeling was one of humanity imposing order upon nature, but lightly, respectfully, recognizing that while they might adapt and make use of the natural world, the people of New Bern weren't so arrogant as to suppose they could control it. It's like a quilt, I thought to myself as I approached the war memorial, all the different patches of green coming together to make a whole. That's why I feel so comfortable here. I'd made my first quilt 25 years before when I was expecting Garrett. From that moment on, I was hooked. I love quilting, the sheer geometry of it, the endless patterns and combinations that can be achieved by the arrangement and rearrangement of something as simple as a straight line. The order and precision of quilting appeals to that part of me that wants a refuge from life's chaos, while the unbounded possibilities of color, fabric, finishing speak to the part of me that wants to live life surprised. The most wonderful thing about quilting is that if a whole stadium full of people were to make a quilt in the exact same patterns, no 2 of those quilts would be alike. No matter how untutored or timid she may be, when it comes to quilting, everyone is an artist. Expertly or innocently or inadvertently, the quilter cannot help but reveal something true. That's what I was feeling as I left the green and joined the dwindling groups of shoppers, enjoying the last lazy rays of sunlight on that fall afternoon, that I had stumbled upon something true, a town completely and unapologetically itself. No one here would think of digging a river where nature hadn't seen fit to put one in the first place, trying to impose some counterfeit, saccharine, quaint overlay of what someone in corporate thought the landscape should look like based on the most recent polling numbers and focus groups. Here, the sidewalks were uneven in spots, and tufts of grass sprouted insistently between the cracks. Walking past the grill on the green, where clutches of diners lingered over coffee and dessert, I looked up and saw that the hand-painted wooden sign suspended overhead had spots of chipped paint, scars from a hailstorm. No one had thought to touch it up after the ravages of winter, trying to restore it to some ideal of pristine condition. Of pristine perfection. The residents and merchants of New Bern weren't striving to achieve perfection because they understood it was the imperfections that made their village perfect, because that was what made it real. One of the first bits of wisdom imparted to a novice quilter is that the Amish, who make some of the most simple but exquisite quilts in the world, purposely plan a mistake into each of their projects because they believe that attempts at human perfection mock God. Of course, any quilter knows that you don't have to plan for imperfections in your work. They come quite naturally on their own. So I don't know if this bit of Amish folklore rings true or not, but the idea does. If there were such a thing as human perfection, it would mean that there was one ideal, one standard for beauty, one right answer to every question. And maybe for the Mr. Lindsays of the world, the people who can't see the difference between a real river and a freshly dug one, who can't understand why somebody would go to all the trouble of stitching a quilt by hand when you can make one fast. Excuse me. I got a little lost. Hold on. Who can't understand why someone would go to all the trouble of stitching a quilt by hand when you could make one faster on a machine, or better yet, buy one cheap from the discount store for $49.95, which is less than you'd pay for the fabric. Maybe for those people, there is some universal ideal. Maybe they simply can't recognize the sublime splendor of imperfection. But I bet the Amish do. And the young waitress who thinks a smaller paycheck is a fair trade for happiness, and whoever owns the sign over the restaurant and lets the chipped paint stay because they realize that tradition and endurance are what ultimately bring us to perfection. They understand. So do I. Maybe that's why, after only a few hours in this little village, I felt more at ease here than I did after 20 years of living in a suburban planned development. How odd, I thought, as I opened the door of the antique store I'd been browsing in and waved in response to the owner's farewell. How odd to be surrounded by strangers and feel so at home. If I believed in past lives, I think I might have met one in New Bern. Of course, that couldn't be. There's no quilt shop here. And even in reincarnation, I can't see me spending a whole lifetime without a place to buy fabric. If not for that, I'd never want to leave. It was nearing 5 o'clock, and some of the shopkeepers were locking up. I was almost at the end of Commerce Street and had investigated every shop. Tomorrow, I planned to take the young waitress's advice and spend the day hiking through the nature preserve, so I knew I should go back to the inn and turn in early. But I really didn't want to. I wanted to make the day last. There was a bakery on the corner with a sign that promised fresh cookies and strong coffee. People were still coming in and out of the door. I wasn't really hungry, but lingering over a cup of coffee seemed a good way to prolong the afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, and it was getting chilly. I shoved my hands in my coat pockets as I hurried toward the bakery. I'd almost reached the door when I heard a bird chirrup that sounded surprisingly close and loud. If the bird hadn't called at the moment it did, I'd have missed it entirely. But when I turned my head to see where the noise came from, I noticed an opening between the two buildings I'd just passed. It was an alley paved with old-fashioned cobblestones, wide enough to allow people to pass on foot, but too narrow for a car. A faded sign posted on a brick wall announced that this was Cobbled Court, and an arrow beneath pointed the way in. There weren't any lights in the alley. Even if there were any shops down the passageway, they'd surely be closed by now, but curiosity got the best of me. Ignoring the damage that the uneven cobbles were inflicting on my high heels, I set out to investigate the passage that, in all probability, led to nothing more interesting than back doors where shopkeepers piled their empty shipping crates and trash cans. But that's why you mustn't bank on probability. Sometimes it's better to follow your instincts. The dark, narrow passageway ended abruptly, opening onto a generous cobbled square, large enough to let a column of light stream into the center. When I stepped out of the dim alleyway and into the light-filled courtyard, it felt like I was passing into a secret world, a place that didn't exist until I had discovered it. At a right angle to the alley I just exited, I saw another passage that I thought might lead to Maple Street, which meant that the courtyard could be accessed from two of New Bern's most important streets. There were a few small storefronts opening onto the courtyard, a gift shop, an art gallery, an attorney's office, but as I had anticipated, they were all closed. One store, much larger than all the others combined, took up an entire brick building. It was empty. Judging from its appearance, It had been for a long time. The red paint on the wooden door was peeling. The big bow front display windows with dozens of panes of glass was clouded with dirt and cobwebs. I moved closer and spied a faded "For Rent" sign taped to the window. Using my sleeve to wipe some of the grime from the glass, I peered inside and saw that the interior of the shop was even bigger than it appeared from the street. I could make out stone floors and scarred wooden counters topped with an old-fashioned black cash register that probably hadn't rung up a sale in decades. The place was in terrible shape. Water stains on the walls testified to the existence of bad plumbing or a leaky roof, probably both. Several of the window panes were cracked and one was completely missing, allowing me to get a strong whiff of wet and mildew when I leaned closer. The window frames were soft in spots where termites had been feasting. In spite of all of this, I could see that once upon a time, it had been charming. Closing my eyes, I could envision how dozens of tiny windows would have gleamed when they were clean and new, and how inviting the red wooden door must have looked when the paint was fresh. In my mind, the sour odor of mold was banished by the perfume of scented geraniums growing in pots under the windows, and I could hear a cheery, frequent jingling as the door swung open and the bells alerted the shopkeeper to the arrival of yet another customer. I could see it all, but only with my eyes closed. Opening them again, I stood face to face with a ruin of a building, an abandoned memory. It must have been lovely, but that was a long time ago. It would take pots of money and a mountain of work to make it look that way again. I didn't care. I backed away from the broken window and started rummaging through my purse for a pen and a scrap of paper so I could write down the name and number of the realtor. This was it. What I had been looking for without even knowing it. My place, my town, my shop. The dream I had nearly forgotten had been waiting for me at the end of a blind alley. I closed my eyes again. The vision came back to me, the shining windows, the gleaming red door, this time with a hand-painted sign overhead that read, "Cobbled Court Quilts." I was in luck. Though it was after hours when I called the real estate office, someone answered the phone. Wendy Perkins said she'd just been getting ready to leave, but seeing as I was only a couple of blocks away, she'd be willing to wait if I came right over. "But," she asked doubtfully, "are you sure we're talking about the same building? That great big space in Cobbled Court, the one with the broken windows?" "Yes," I assured her. "I'm standing in front of it right now. Red door and a bow front window. How much does it rent for?" "Honestly, I don't remember. It's been so long since anyone inquired. I'll have to look up the information in my files, but I'll have it by the time you get here." When I walked through the door of the office, I was enthusiastically greeted by an older woman with a white beehive hairdo. She wore a big pair of rhinestone-encrusted sunglasses on a rhinestone-encrusted chain around her neck and pants that were a size too small. She snorted whenever she laughed, which was often, wrinkling her nose, folding up her tongue in a little U shape when she did, and involuntarily thrusting it through the O of her lips. She reminded me of that Lily Tomlin character, Ernestine, the wickedly funny telephone operator whose weekly appearances on Laugh-In, back when I was a teenager, always had me rolling. I liked her instantly. "It's in here somewhere, Evelyn," she said, frowning and pushing her glasses up on her nose while she dug through the file drawers. "It'll take me a minute or two before I find it. The paperwork on that building must be older than me." Snort, snort. She laughed and I joined in. It was impossible not to. "What's the history of the building?" "Well, it was originally a drugstore way back at the turn of the century, Fielding Drug Emporium. It was family run all the way up till the 60s, but then Jim Fielding died of a heart attack real sudden and the place closed down. After that, there were a couple of boutiques that tried their luck, but it's such a big space and not an ideal location. People don't know it's there unless they walk down that passage. It'd be fine if you were catering to a clientele of alley cats and rats." Snort, snort. "You're not looking to open a pet supply store, are you?" Snort. I smiled. "No, afraid not. I'm a quilter." Years ago, when I was first married, I dreamed of opening a quilt shop on my own back in Wisconsin. That's where my husband and I grew up. At one point, I actually inquired about getting a loan and started working on a business plan, thinking I'd do it as soon as my son was in school and I had a little more time. But you know how things go. My husband got a job offer in Texas for a lot more money. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. At the time, I thought I'd just open my store in Texas, but the town we moved to didn't support small businesses. 2 quilt shops opened while I was there. They asked me to teach some classes, which I loved. And sometimes I'd help out in the store too, just part-time work, you know. But in the end, they couldn't compete with the big fabric stores, so they closed. Then, too, I was very involved with my son, his school, and I volunteered for all kinds of community things. It's no one's fault but mine, but eventually I just gave up on my dream and, in a way, on myself. I don't know when it happened, but it did. Now I find myself nearing 50 and newly single, and when I saw that storefront today, I knew. I just knew. Wendy's eyes were fixed on me as I spoke. Suddenly I felt very foolish telling my life story to a stranger. Well, you know what they say, better late than never. I laughed, but this time Wendy didn't join in. Instead, she leaned forward, making the springs on the desk chair squeak, and placed her hand on my knee. Evelyn, believe me, I'd be happy to make this deal, but you seem like a nice lady. You need to think this through. You've just gone through a divorce. Maybe this isn't the time for you to be making such a big decision or moving to a town where you don't know anyone. At a time like this, you need friends around, old friends who know you and what you've been through, people who can support you. This is a huge change you're contemplating and an expensive one. I don't know what your financial situation is, but if you're like most recent divorcees, then this is the worst possible time for you to be taking a big financial risk. I know what I'm talking about. You think I'd be sitting in an office trying to sell real estate at 6 on a Thursday night if I didn't? At my age, I should be sitting on a beach in Florida, calling my children and nagging them because they never come to see me. She snorted, but half-heartedly. Her eyes became serious again. And even if you weren't reeling from the effects of your divorce, be practical. New Bern isn't big enough to support a quilt shop. You won't last 6 months. That was chapter 2. I have to stop. I'm going to tell you a quick story. So Wendy is based on a person I met. I don't remember this woman's name, but she had the rhinestone glasses and she did the snort and she did the little, it was hilarious. And I took notes as soon as I got in my car and used her for Wendy. So anyway, that's just a little aside. Are you ready for chapter 3? I hope you're enjoying this, guys. I'm really enjoying reading to you. Carry on, Chairman. Don't make noise. The chairman's leaving. All right. We're meeting a new character. This is my very favorite, one of my very favorite characters I've ever written. Chapter 3, Abigail Burgess Wynn. People like me. I'm aware that some might consider this a less than humble statement, perhaps even arrogant. But really, humility is an overrated quality, don't you think? Besides, in my case, it's true. People do like me. They always have. And if I'd ever harbored any doubts on the subject, though I never really did, it was assuaged last night. Yesterday, March 14th, was my 62nd birthday. Franklin Spaulding, who has been my attorney for decades, hosted a party in my honor at the Grill on the Green. Positively everyone I knew attended, plus a few people I didn't. The pastor and deacons of the Congregational Church, whose new fellowship hall I had financed and whose services I attend on major holidays. The directors of the Wynn Memorial Library, the County Windham Shelter, and the New Bern Historic Preservation Society, the Nature Preserve Foundation, the Concert Association, and assorted other community organizations that count on me for advice and contributions, as well as the various board members of those organizations, not to mention the many merchants who own antique shops, art galleries, design studios, clothing boutiques, jewelers, restaurants, and bookstores that I frequent, plus all the people I know through my memberships at the tennis, golf, and equestrian clubs, and of course, the spouses, partners, and significant others of the aforementioned. There were so many guests that the party completely overtook the restaurant, which might have proved frustrating to other prospective diners, but I don't think so. It's still too chilly for tourists, people who would especially on a Thursday before the weekenders are due. So the only people who would have been planning to eat at the grill were locals. And as I say, nearly all the locals were already at the party. Of course, I am aware that the party guests I've listed had a vested interest, if not an obligation, to make an appearance at the celebration. I am the wealthiest woman in New Bern, possibly the wealthiest woman in this part of the state, though I don't know for certain. Franklin, my attorney, keeps track of all my investments and financial dealings. I'm not much interested in the actual figures or details of my portfolio, but Franklin says I have plenty of money to live well and to be a generous benefactor in my community, so I do, and I am. Certainly that generosity could lead you to believe that many of those who came to celebrate my natal day did so because they felt they had to. Not that I'd faulted them if they did. There's nothing wrong with fulfilling one's community and social obligations, but that wasn't the case, and I have proof. During the course of the evening, I had to visit the ladies' room. When I went in, both stalls were occupied, so I was obliged to wait my turn. While doing so, I inadvertently heard an interesting exchange between two of the party goers. It's so strange, isn't it? The way women have long, in-depth conversations while in the toilet. I don't think men do that, do you? And certainly I never would, but all the same, if you're careful about where you stand and you keep quiet, you can learn a lot in the ladies' room. Not that I want anyone to think I'm an eavesdropper, but really, who isn't interested in hearing how people honestly feel about them? It isn't my fault that women insist on talking in semi-public places. One of the speakers was Grace Kahn. I've known Grace for years. She volunteers 3 days a week at the library and sits on the board too. For the previous 24 years, until her knee surgery a few months ago, we played doubles tennis every Wednesday. The other voice belonged to a woman I'd met for the first time that night, Margot Matthews. She owns a little 2-bedroom carriage house on Marsh Lane that, until recently, she only occupied on weekends. We have a few of those in New Bern, New Yorkers mostly, who keep a house in the country for weekends and summers. Some of the locals grumble about them, but not me. They're nice enough people for the most part, and they certainly help keep the local economy going, so what's to complain about? I go to Manhattan to enjoy the delights of the city. Why shouldn't urbanites feel free to enjoy the delights of the country? Everybody needs a change of scenery now and then. But I digress. I was speaking of Margot Matthews. Until recently, she worked in Manhattan in the marketing department of some large firm that sells semiconductors or some such thing. I wasn't paying that much attention when she told me about her former business. Dull stuff business. But once I found out that Miss Matthews studied ballet as a child, the conversation became much more interesting. People's hobbies tend to be so much more intriguing than their professions. Don't you agree? Grace whispered into my ear that the poor thing had been downsized, that is to say, fired, and was living in New Bern full time now because finances had forced her to sublet her apartment in the city until she could find a new job. Grace had noticed Margot sitting at the same computer workstation in the library day after day, searching the internet for job postings. She seemed so forlorn. She doesn't know anyone, Grace whispered to me as she beckoned to the young woman who was just getting a glass of wine at the bar. So I invited her to come along tonight. I hope you don't mind, Abigail. And of course I didn't. Why would I? It wasn't as if I had to take on Margot Matthews as my new best friend. Besides, I enjoy meeting new people. And they enjoy meeting me, as evidenced by the cross-stall conversation that took place between Margot and Grace in the restaurant ladies' room. Thank you for bringing me along tonight, Grace. I can't tell you how ready I was for a night out. After all those hours I've spent sending out emails to human resource departments and getting no response, it's just lovely to talk with some real human beings. Especially Abigail. She's fascinating. I can't believe she actually knows Mikhail Baryshnikov. It was awfully nice of her to let me crash the party. I knew she wouldn't mind. Abigail likes meeting new people. She loves drawing them out, finding some common ground for conversation. Grace laughed. I think she enjoys the challenge, as if she was able to solve some sort of a mystery. She looked straight in at you with those intense brown eyes, as if every word you were saying was completely and utterly absorbing. And of course, you end up falling in love with her. It's impossible not to. In some way or another, everybody in that room owes Abigail something, but that's not why they're here tonight. Even if Abigail wasn't a benefactress to half the town, no one would dream of missing her birthday party. People like her. See, what did I tell you? How did the two of you meet? Margot inquired. Playing tennis. I was her doubles partner for years. She used to play singles and doubles until last year. Abigail has 10 years on me, but she can still run me off the court. She's very athletic. Hiking, riding, sailing, name a sport, Abigail excels at it. Well, I'd never have guessed she was 62 if you hadn't told me. She is amazing looking, isn't she? Her skin positively glows, and it's all natural. At least I think it is. It is. I don't put much faith in cosmetic surgeons or cosmetics for that matter. Everyone ages, and I don't understand why people spend so much time and money trying to avoid the inevitable. At my age, beauty is a ship that has sailed. The best one can hope for is to be thought of as handsome, and while I try my best to keep myself up, a little face powder and lipstick is as far as I go. When it comes to makeup and fashion, simplicity is the best. My closet is filled with classic clothing of excellent quality, well-cut wool slacks, silk blouses, an array of cashmere sweaters, and for more formal occasions like this evening, an assortment of black cocktail dresses. Oh, and shoes. Good shoes are a must. My preference is for Stuart Weitzman, classic designs that are just different enough to be interesting and have heels you can actually walk in. Not far, mind you, but far enough. If you carry yourself well, that's really all you need in the way of fashion. That and a few pieces of well-chosen jewelry. Pearls, matching earrings, a good diamond tennis bracelet, and perhaps one simply spectacular ring, like the enormous yellow diamond Wooly Wynn gave me when he proposed. Well, she's certainly a handsome woman, Margot commented. Thank you, Margot. You should have seen her when she was younger. She was stunning. She looked like Katharine Hepburn. In fact, she still reminds me of Hepburn. She has those same amazing cheekbones, that confident spring in her step. You get the sense that she enjoys life fully. And, well, I don't mean that she's conceited necessarily, but she's just entirely pleased to be Abigail. If she wasn't so clearly interested in others, she'd probably come off as arrogant, but she's not. She's just supremely confident, and I think people find that attractive. And of course, she's very well educated. She can talk intelligently on almost any subject. Well, that isn't so difficult. If people would just read more instead of spending so much time in front of the television, the world would be a much more interesting place. I think we owe it to other people to be interesting, or at least not to be dull. So she is very much in demand when it comes to parties. Do you know that there are people in New Bern who actually canceled their parties or changed the date when they heard that Abigail couldn't come? Really? You're kidding. Margot laughed at this, and I could understand why. It really is ridiculous and canceling an entire party just because one person can't come, but it has been known to happen. It's true, Grace confirmed. I know it sounds silly, but I don't half blame them. If Abigail shows up, the party is bound to be a success. She flits from one group to the other like a bumblebee among the flowers, touching down here and there and kind of pollinating the conversation before she moves on. The next thing you know, everyone is talking and laughing and having a marvelous time. There was a rustle of tissue from inside one of the stalls. I took a silent step backward and put my hand on the door, just in case. Well, she seems really lovely, Margot said. You're lucky to have someone like that for a friend. A friend? I've known Abigail for decades, but I don't think you could say we're friends. No? Then who are her friends? Grace was quiet for a moment, considering. I don't think she has any, really. Not the way most people think of friendship. I adore Abigail, of course. Everyone does, and she likes us, but I don't think she thinks of any of us as friends. She doesn't let anybody get that close. The sound of water rushing told me it was time to leave, so I slipped out of the room undetected. It might have been interesting to learn more, but I didn't really need to. Grace's revelation to Margot was no surprise to me. She was quite right. I like people, and they like me, and I like me too. But I don't have close friendships, and I see no need to develop any. Friends, in my opinion, are supremely inconvenient. They are people who have a grasp on one's affections and therefore have the right to call upon one for financial or emotional support, usually at the most inopportune moments. I suppose that's why I've always avoided them. The first prospect doesn't distress me too much. I'm certainly in a position to be generous, but the second, that is a different matter. Emotions are sticky things, and even the more inconvenient than friendships. I don't trust them. Truthfully, I don't trust in much of anything except my own ability to handle whatever life sends my way. If I am proud of anything, it is that. I can take care of myself, and I always have. My father used to say, never complain and never explain, which I took to mean that the only person you can or should depend upon is yourself. So it's best to keep yourself to yourself. It was advice I took to heart. And until the phone rang at 9:45 on the day after my birthday party, it was advice that has served me well. That is the end of chapter 3, my friends. I will see you here on Monday. And we will read, I think chapter 4 is really long, so I'll probably just read chapter 4, but we'll see you then. In the meantime, I hope you have a really wonderful weekend. Oh gosh, and tomorrow is National Quilting Day. So if you get on my blog, I have a post about 10 ways to celebrate National Quilting Day wherever you are. So even if you're stuck at home and you're a quilter, you can still have some fun on National Quilting Day. Until Monday, my friends, I will see you soon. God bless you. Oh, you know what? One last thing. Something I wanted to, some of you appreciated the Bible verse I shared last time. So for those of you who like this sort of thing, and if you don't, you can just tune it out. But this is comforting to me today. Psalm 46, verses 1 and 2. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, even though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Good words for today, my friends. Love you. See you Monday.